G'day YouTubers, how you all going? My name's Wilfred, West Wilfred's PC World, Lakeside Cottage in Locksport, Victoria, Australia. Today's date is the 13th of the 3rd, 2015, and it's 20 to 11 in the morning. And we're going from Locksport to Sale today. I'm just going to record it with the GoPro here. And we'll just fast forward through all the slow bits. I'm just testing out the dual camera at the moment inside the car. I need, I think something in the car so I can actually mount this so I can actually view myself. Like, I think if I put it here, right, get the right angle and get the right height, I can put something there and I can actually view myself and also the front of the car as well. Oh well, anyway, I hope you like this video, and if so, please subscribe.
Whilst the juvenile was given 3 years jail. The Indian government then passed new sexual assault laws, including a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years for gang rape. But the rape and murder of Jyoti Singh triggered massive protests in India. Women and men came out in their thousands, criticising the Indian government.
Australia, you've got to show the fans what it means to you, and it means a lot to our guys. And I just think the last game wasn't characteristic.
In cricket, Australian opener David Warner says his side should be feared by others in the World Cup. Australia is guaranteed a quarter-final berth and will finish second in its group with a win against Scotland in Hobart on Saturday. An independent. It's been revealed the Palmer United Party sacked the Queensland Senator's wife yesterday, and he announced his resignation a short time later. Party leader Clive Palmer has been speaking to ABC local radio in Brisbane.
The national director of the party decided to terminate Tess Lazarus' wife's employment because she had failed to honour the terms of the employment contract. And Senator Lazarus resigned just after that. He rang me up and expressed concern, and then he said call me later, which he failed to do, but just sent a text through, and that's all I got.
So you just had a text message from him last night. What were the terms of employment that Tess Lazarus breached? Are you aware of that?
I'm not fully aware of that. That's because of the national director. But I mean, I hope that none of those things are linked. But again, he hasn't said any policy differences or anything to do with politics, but towards his decision. And that's disappointing because all members of Parliament really have an obligation and a duty to represent the people who elect them as hard as they can. And I think we were very successful in stopping the co-payment, saving the Climate Change Authority, saving the REMA, saving the Skill Fit bonus, saving low-income super, reducing electricity prices by 10%. The list goes on, and no one in Australia's history has ever done that in the first 6 months or 7 months of the Parliament. And of course, the Liberal Party didn't like it, Campbell Newman didn't like it, Tony Abbott didn't like it, and there's been a lot of momentum putting pressure on our people to change. But we're standing firm as a party because they're the things we believe in.
There are question marks over how much you can continue to achieve with just yourself and D.O. Wong. Do you think that the party will survive?
Well, you've just got to look at history, haven't you? The Greens took 30 years to get one seat in the House of Representatives. We got one in 6 weeks, right? The Democrats don't hold any seats in the party. And there's been no party in the history since Federation that's had an impact on so much legislation. Don't forget the other government's now got an inquiry into an ETS. Of course, we did it. We negotiated it. It was our idea. Because we're tapping into the aspirations and the hopes of what's best for Australians. And that's what they want to do. I was a public figure a long time before I entered politics. So I've been involved in the battle of ideas, and I'll continue to be. And they're the things that can change the policy, shape public opinion, and make a difference for the nation.
In the public sphere, we have lost 2 Queensland MPs. You have lost the Northern Territory members, Senator Lambie, Senator Lazarus. How do you come back from this and convince people that the problem is not with you and the party?
Well, it's not. simple as that. We've got our ideas that we put forward, people can vote for it. Of course, our ideas run contrary to a two-party system and contrary to the current status quo. And it's not unusual that people that come from the status quo, I mean, the reality of it is that Senator Lambie and Senator Lazarus were elected by us, and we had 6 weeks before the last federal election. So we had a lot of people that came with a lot of different ideas, but that's changed now. We've solidified our policy. We've put out a clear message for Australians what we stand for, and we have got significant support at the polls. That was demonstrated in the last Queensland election, where in the seats that we campaigned, we got 12% of the vote, and we got 9% in all the seats, as an average that we stood in. So that's pretty good.
I guess you talk about Senator Lazarus making a decision after his wife was sacked by the party.
Yeah.
Can you understand if your wife was employed by your employer and that employer sacked your wife, wouldn't you feel some responsibility to quit?
Not really. I think I'd recognise my wife as an individual, and she can rise and fall on her own merit. She doesn't need me to prop her up. That's how I look at it personally, if you ask me how I personally deal with it. But really, he's in a public position where he's taken a public stance and gone to the election and said he'll do certain things. He'll be with our party, he'll be with our brand. Now, if you're honest about that, you should stick with that. If you change that position, that's not fair to the people of Queensland. He should resign his position in the Senate.
So you think he's made a mistake and should now quit?
Well, I don't. He doesn't stand for those things, but he hasn't said, to give him credit, that he will vote against what our policies are. That's the critical thing. He's gone to the election with saying that he supports these policies. So let's hope that he doesn't allow education to get through and doesn't side with the government. Let's hope that he supports us and supports other senators in the Parliament to stop the co-payment. Let's hope that he remains true to why he stood for Parliament to start.
That's Palmer United Party leader Clive Palmer speaking to David Curnow on ABC Local Radio in Brisbane. And our web poll question today is to do with this story. It is, does the resignation of Glenn Lazarus spell the end of the Palmer United Party's political influence being offered by the Commonwealth, meaning the airport's private operator would foot a large part of the bill? The announcement was made jointly with the Shadow Federal Minister Anthony Albanese. The current state government has so far only committed to preserving the rail corridor. Mr Foley has also promised to match the $389 million funding commitment made by the Premier, Mike Baird, to build and upgrade roads around the future airport. New South Wales residents could soon be able to obtain a digital driver's licence. The state government says it will oversee a transition to digital licences over the next 4 years for a range of licence types, including photo cards and driver's licences. The Minister for Finance and Services, Dominic Perrottet, says New South Wales will be the first Australian state to offer digital licences.
Well, we live in a time where everybody is using their phones to buy, to sell, to shop for insurance. Why should they not be able to access their license on their phone as well?
Economy as a whole, and of course for U.S. consumers.
Well, there are positives and negatives. The big negative, of course, is that U.S. exporters have a harder time selling their products because they're priced in dollars. That hurts their profits, and that's been reflected in recent days in major U.S. stock indexes, which have fallen. They've recovered a little bit today. Most of the big companies on those indexes have foreign sales, and if their profits fall, their stocks are less attractive. And fewer profits will trim job creation at those companies and hurt overall U.S. growth. So that's a major negative.
You've given us the negatives here, John. I mean, what's the good news? What are the positive effects?
Well, imports are less expensive. So if you're a U.S. business that imports some of its raw materials or components, those are now cheaper. If you're an American consumer who buys imported clothing or electronics or automobiles, you're going to get more for your dollar. Also, a strong dollar puts downward pressure on oil prices, so it contributes to lower gasoline prices too.
So, on balance here, do the positives outweigh the negatives?
Well, if the dollar is strong just because the rest of the world is experiencing weakness, then maybe it's not such a good thing. And there's a difference of opinion about whether it's a healthy U.S. economy that's pumping up the dollar or simply weakness abroad. Historically, a strong dollar has been associated with a strong U.S. economy, but it's not clear yet whether that will be the case this time.
That's NPR's economics correspondent John Itzy. John, thanks so much.
You're welcome, Audrey.
The reckless image of adolescence looks something like this. A teenager, say about 16, behind the wheel, smoking, drinking, and driving dangerously. But now it's believed that the changes in the brain that lead to the famously bad choices of adolescence actually start earlier, around 11 or 12, along with puberty. This week, member station WNYC in New York is running a series on the beginning of adolescence. It's called Being 12. And Corey Turner, the NPR Ed team, contributed this story set inside the wilds of the adolescent brain.
Let's start with an experiment. At Temple University, psychology professor Lawrence Steinberg and his team put a bunch of adolescents into an fMRI machine, a brain scanner, and asked them to play a driving game.
And you come to a series of intersections and the lights turn yellow and you have to decide whether to put the brakes on or not.
Now, what do you think the adolescents did in this situation? Wrong. They did not blow through the yellow every time.
When adolescents are playing this game by themselves, they don't take any more chances than adults do when they're playing by themselves.
And that's a big deal, Steinberg says, because the adolescent brain gets a bad rep for being consistently impulsive. His latest book, called Age of Opportunity, is an attempt to set the record straight. Being 12 or 17 doesn't mean you're hardwired to always make bad choices. Why then do adolescents make so many bad choices? To find out, Steinberg added a twist to his experiment. He gave his subjects an adolescent crowd.
This doubles the number of chances that adolescents take, but has no effect on the number of chances that adults take.
In short, an adolescent's weakness is other adolescents.
Adolescence is a time, really, when the brain is being marinated in gonadal hormones.
B.J. Casey is a neuroscientist at Weill Cornell Medical College, and she says much of the turmoil in the 12-year-old brain comes from changes in two places. First, the prefrontal cortex, one of the last areas of the brain to mature.
It helps to link past experiences to the current situation and consider what the future consequences are of choices and actions that are made.
The prefrontal cortex is our voice of reason. Steinberg calls it the brain's CEO. Casey likens it to this guy.
The odds against you and I both being killed are 2,228.7.
That is, of course, Spock from Star Trek.
The rational person on the Starship Enterprise. And he often has to keep the passionate Captain Kirk at bay.
Traitors, I'll hang you up for your buccaneers. Are you all executed? I think not. Your authority on this...
Body cameras recorded this traffic stop. The officer pulled over a woman for not wearing her seatbelt. She also wasn't wearing her driver's license. Out of the car and visibly agitated, she slung a few insults, then tried to drive the officer.
No, pero yo no quiero ofrecer.
The officer is heard saying, "I'm not asking for anything." The woman who claims she's a doctor in neighboring San Diego, California, says, "Well, I'm offering." Finally, the cop says, "Sure, give me money." She hands him $40 US. The officer then informs her she's under arrest.
As a police officer, you always get criticized about your good behavior and wrong behavior.
Now the cameras will show the truth of Tijuana Police Chief Alejandro Lares Valadera. Lares, who rose through the ranks to take over the border city's 2,100 police a year and a half ago, says it's not easy being a cop in Mexico. He says you pull someone over and the threats begin.
You know what? You don't know who you're messing with. You're gonna lose your job, and blah blah blah, yada yada. So now what we're doing is opening Pandora box. If they try to criticize my police officers, well, now that we'll have proof on who and what they're saying.
But while Lares pushes the cameras as a tool to help the good cops on his force, he still has to deal with the bad ones. Municipal police in Mexico are among the most corrupt security forces in the country. And Tijuana's, one of the largest in Mexico, is no exception. It has long struggled with corruption allegations and routine purges. A recent survey of the police force by researchers at the University of San Diego showed that 80% of cops believe there is corruption among the ranks. That makes Lares' job of rooting out the bad while professionalizing the good a difficult political dance.
Siéntense, muchachos, buenas tardes, gracias. Siéntense, por favor.
In an auditorium at an eastern Tijuana substation, about 100 officers rise as the chief walks into the room. shows the cops the video of the bribing woman and passes around one of the new miniature cameras.
Esto no es para venir a tenerlo picado por usted.
This is not a way to check up on you, Mrs. Lottis. It's another tool to help you do your job. Some, however, are not convinced. Officer Juan Betecor says the force is divided over the cameras. He's for them, and in his 21 years on the beat, he says he's never been bribed, but he has been accused of wrongdoing. And you just don't have any way to defend yourself. He says with the camera, now we can. And as for the woman offering a bribe in the video, she was released after paying a 7,500 peso fine, about $500. Jerry Khan, NPR News, Tijuana.
And you have been listening to All Things Considered from our broadcast partners, National Public Radio in Washington. You are listening to ABC News Radio. Tim Skelton here with you. We've got a news update coming up for you very shortly.
Hi, I'm Tracy Holmes. Join me every Sunday morning for your ticket to the stories behind the news in sport.
Afghanistan is a tough country to live. While we were in Zimbabwe, there was a...
So, to understand it, you have to understand the religious, but you also have to understand the contemporary political, social, and economic reality that makes its rise possible.
Is it then possible to truly defeat the organisation without addressing some of those fundamental issues?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to defeat this movement either purely on ideological grounds. In other words, to engage with it ideologically is a futile act, especially for non-Muslims, because non-Muslims have no standing in deciding or discussing what is or is not Islamic. That's one aspect of it. The other is that I think the only way to really understand the rise of ISIS is to understand that it's a symptom of a deeper structural set of issues that make its rise possible. And these deeper structural issues have to do principally with the sense that Sunni Muslims and Sunni Arabs in particular have of having been disenfranchised, having been humiliated by the West on the one hand and by Shiites on the other, by also being ruled by corrupt and tyrannical regimes that are brutal in their practices and not representative of true Islam. And these are the regimes of the Arab world. So without addressing the structural issues, you can't really get rid of what produces ISIS. You could defeat ISIS, but another thing would emerge after it. Just like ISIS is a product of the defeat in part of Al-Qaeda, right? So, we had one movement, which was already pretty bad. Now we have an even worse movement, and we have yet to really address the problems that have led to this form of radicalization.
When you see the responses that we're seeing from the Arab world and also from the West, is there any real indication that some of those issues are being addressed, or at least that they're still going into the fact that this is much bigger than simply military victory?
I don't actually. Unfortunately, I don't see the West doing the right thing. Certainly, at the moment, the United States involvement on the side of Iran and the Iraqi Shiites dominating government and fighting ISIS is only going to add to the roots of this movement. The Arab Spring, this movement that started in late 2010 or 2011, which we all thought would reform the politics of the Arab world, has actually gone in full reverse, and the government has become much more authoritarian, much more brutal than they were even before. So we have a counter-revolution.
That is the sport for now. I'll be back in just under half an hour.
Thanks very much, Scott Wales. A look at The weather in the nation's capitals today. Brisbane expecting a shower or two, a top of 30 degrees. Right now it's 29. Sydney can expect a shower or two also, a top of 23. Currently it's 21. A cloudy day in Canberra, 22 the forecast high. Currently it's 18 degrees. Melbourne, cloudy and a top of 21. Right now it's 20 degrees. Hobart, a partly cloudy day, a top of 20 is expected. Right now it's 19. A sunny day in Adelaide, 28 at the top, but right now it's 26. Showers and a likely storm developing in Perth. 34 is the forecast high, and right now it is at 34 degrees. And a possible shower or storm in Darwin. Right now it's 33 degrees, going for a top of 34.
ABC News Radio headlines.
The 34 past and present Essendon players who took part in the club's 2012 supplements program will learn their fate by the end of the month. The AFL has announced its anti-doping tribunal will hand down a decision regarding the matter on Tuesday the 31st of March. That's just 2 days before the opening game of the season. Queensland Senator Glenn Lazarus says his decision to quit the Palmer United Party has nothing to do with it sacking his wife. Clive Palmer says Glenn Lazarus resigned by text message after the party sacked his wife Tess. And the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews has ridiculed moves by the New South Wales government to poach the Formula One Grand Prix. New South Wales Premier Mike Baird has vowed to make a bid for Sydney to host the race once Melbourne's contract expires in 2020. Mr Andrews says Sydney doesn't stand a chance. The federal government is under increasing pressure to do more to help agricultural exporters overcome difficult rules and regulations in key markets. It's estimated that things like additional quarantine inspections and difficulty accessing ports or storage could cost as much as $7 billion in lost trade. The Trade Minister Andrew Robb says a worldwide agreement due to come into force this year is the best way to improve access from a range of markets. From Canberra, Naomi Woodley reports.
The federal government counts trade as one of its most successful portfolios, having signed free trade agreements with China, Korea and Japan. The agricultural industry has warmly welcomed the tariff reductions that come with those agreements, but a range of sectors say attention now needs to focus on other impediments to exporters. Noel Campbell is the chairman of the Australian Dairy Industry Council. A report for the dairy industry models the cost of what are known as technical barriers to trade at $1.5 billion to the dairy industry. Estimates for all agriculture fall between $5 and $7 billion. The CEO of Cherry Growers Australia, Simon Bowie, says, for example, they could significantly increase exports if air freight was used in all markets.
One of the final trade creates great reputation for the importers to recruit those countries while yesterday they countries. I think with all the stakeholders need to really think about our new approach to how we market and sell our products and get over some of these.
The Trade Minister Andrew Robb acknowledges that such barriers exist and that they do significantly increase the cost of doing business, but he says it's a complex problem.
Many of the issues they're talking about are the phytosanitary issues, which is a disease issue for livestock and agricultural produce of all sorts. And those agreements have been struck for many years. Most of the major exporters that we export to, things like use-by dates. We get complaints that some countries are 4 months and others are 9 months. Well, things like different climates often have an effect on use-by dates. When you borrow into it, sometimes it's not as draconian as it first looks. So it's a complicated area. It is costly. It is being abused by some countries at times, but we have got a whole division of people who are on the case.
The Minister says the World Trade Organisation's Trade Facilitation Agreement, which is waiting to come into effect, should help to address many of the exporters' concerns.
We have ratified the agreement, and a lot of the developed countries have. Once we get to 2/3, then it's forming goes into force. This is a really major development. It's the first agreement the WTO formed about 20 years ago.
Noel Campbell from the Dairy Industry Council agrees the WTO agreement should help, but he says it's a slow process.
We believe that we need to probably target other things that we think are achievable, and we'll work with the government and the possible council within market to resolve those.
And Simon Bowie from Cherry Growers Australia agrees bilateral agreements are important.
Take it on countries like that and go and talk to the countries about what are the issues.
That's Simon Bowie from Cherry Growers Australia, ending that report from Naomi Whitley. With the latest figures showing that Australia's unemployment rate remains over 6%, the Productivity Commission is in the midst of an industrial relations review. But the federal opposition is worried that might lead to changes to Australia's minimum wage laws. Australia's federal minimum wage, one of the oldest in the world, is currently $640 a week, and Bill Shorten says linking the minimum wage to rising unemployment isn't backed up by the evidence. John Barron from ABC Fact Check investigates.
Opposition leader Bill Shorten says the minimum wage doesn't cause an increase in unemployment.
With the minimum wage, I'd only accept the case has been made that it contributes to unemployment levels in this country. The experience in Europe, where they've started to increase or introduce the minimum wage, has been exactly the opposite.
One argument against the minimum wage is that forcing employers to pay a certain amount could make them cut back on staff to reduce costs. In reality, though, experts say it's difficult to measure because there are so many other factors that affect decisions employers make about hiring. In the US, some research has found there is a link between the minimum wage and rising unemployment. But research in the UK and Europe found the minimum wage didn't seem to make a difference. Experts say if the minimum wage is set too high, it could increase unemployment for all age groups. And a US study into the job markets of 17 countries, including Australia, found the minimum wage could have an adverse effect on youth employment. Some European studies have reached the same conclusion. So while there is a significant body of research that backs up Mr. Shorten's claim the minimum wage doesn't contribute to unemployment rates overall, there's other evidence to suggest it could increase youth unemployment or cause problems if the minimum pay is set too high. Out in the next, there's more to the story.
And that's John Barron from ABC Fact Check.
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
One of the investigators of the Fukushima nuclear disaster is warning Australia to carefully consider the risks of the industry before getting involved in it. A Royal Commission looking at expanding South Australia's role in the nuclear industry will begin next week. Professor Nobuyama Akiyama says the Japanese people underestimated the risk, and he's warning South Australia not to make the same mistake. But he still believes there is a role for nuclear in the world's energy future. In Adelaide, Natalie Whiting reports.
4 years ago, a massive earthquake and tsunami in Japan caused a triple nuclear meltdown at Fukushima. 120,000 people still can't return to their homes because of the radiation levels. Professor Nobumasa Akiyama was an investigator with the Independent Investigation Panel into the disaster. He says there are many lessons to be learned from Fukushima, including to expect the unexpected.
Think about unthinkable. I think that's the important principle, to think about the risk of nuclear problems.
So do you think that the Japanese people perhaps underestimated what the possible risk would be from that point?
No, that's what I thought. In general, probably the accident not but the deterioration situation could be preventable. The people in Japan had prepared much better.
The lessons are particularly pertinent for South Australia. A royal commission will begin in the state looking at further involvement in the nuclear industry. The draft terms have been released and are fairly broad. They look at everything from establishing a waster to setting up a full power station. Professor Akiyama says he encourages Australians to look at both the opportunities and the risks.
community as a whole.
It's too much risk for the opportunity.
And then they will think seriously about how
the risk is too high for the opportunity.
We cannot think of at the time that we start the project. I think people tend to underestimate the risk, and that mentality will prevent the people from learning the lesson from the past. In case of people experienced the Chernobyl and also Three Island accidents, and then the Japanese people tend to see these accidents as accidents of others. So I said the nuclear accident anywhere is accident everywhere.
But despite the disaster, he still believes nuclear is an important energy source.
As a reliable baseload energy, the nuclear plays some important role. So I think the Japanese economy chose to keep, to some extent, the level of nuclear energy. And then I think some other countries must rely on nuclear energy if you think about the issue of climate change.
He says countries like Japan and Australia need to work to prevent nuclear accidents and terrorism to aid the industry.
We see the consequences of accidents. We see the potential risk of nuclear terrorism, and we have to prevent them. And eventually, preventing these accidental risks will facilitate the process of
consultation on the draft terms of reference that Australia's Royal Commission closes today. You're listening to ABC News Radio.
Kathy Bell will be along with a full news update shortly, but first, one of the first quakes that an underwater volcano had erupted 1,000 kilometres north of New Zealand was some pumice washing up on the east coast of Australia. Some of the fragments were as big as basketballs. Now scientists are embarking on a research voyage to study the volcano. A volcanologist from the University of Tasmania, is one of the researchers who will be on board. She's been speaking to reporter Felicity Overton.
Since March 2014, we've had reports all across the state of volcanic pumice eruptions. The community have in basically trying to explain where this pumice is coming from, because there's been massive amounts of arriving in the coast of Tasmania. We actually know where this volcanic pumice has come from, because we know the source of the eruption, and it arrived on the east coast of Australia about a year ago. So the source of the pumice is a volcano in the Kermadec Arc, which is about 1,000 kilometres north of New Zealand. You know how many people were stuck in on the coast of Australia? We're not sure of the context of it. We know that this eruption produced about 2 cubic kilometres of pumice, so that's extraordinary. And probably up to a third of that got dispersed around the Pacific Ocean. So we're talking probably thousands to tens of thousands of tons of pumice across the Pacific. That's the same with the volcano had a name that it's very wide and yeah, so it has a name, it's called Abode volcano. And these types of volcanic eruptions are probably 1% of the events across the globe. So Abode probably has an eruption frequency of maybe one of these type of eruptions every 2,000 years. So it's just our luck, I guess, that it's erupted and all those satellites have been also locked up. The volcano had a bunch of start washing up the beaches around Australia. So that's a really good question. We had no idea that this volcano had erupted. The first knowledge we had was from the passenger of an airline jet who looked out of the window and saw these rafts of volcanic pumice. And for some reason, she knew exactly what they were. So she contacted the Geological Survey of New Zealand, who then contacted us and said, we think there's been an eruption in this area. And we were able to access some satellite imagery and backtrack the source of the pumice raft. So it was just because of basically this passenger that had alerted us to this eruption until the pumice arrived, and then